Let me introduce our keynote speaker. It's a great honor to welcome Kevin Prindiville. Kevin is the Executive Director of Justice and Aging, a national nonprofit advocacy organization that uses the power of law to fight poverty and advance equity for all of us as we age. Justice and Aging is a national organization, but one that also does a significant amount of work in California. We've built in some time for audience Q&A. So all of you, you'll find at your tables, there are 3x5 cards and pens if you need them. When you have questions, write them on the cards, raise your hand, and volunteers will collect them. So with that, I'm going to welcome Kevin.
Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you today. I might walk around a little bit as I'm going here, so I'll go with the handheld mic. First, I want to make sure I'm in the right spots. I want to ask a little bit about all of you. Who in this room here considers themselves an advocate for older adults? All right, that's a good start. Who here considers themselves an advocate for people with disabilities? Someone who cares about older adults and people with disabilities? Or someone who is an older adult or who is trying to become an older adult? All right, good. Then I'm definitely in the right place. I'm Kevin Prindiville, as Wendy said. I'm the Executive Director of Justice and Aging. We're a national nonprofit legal advocacy organization that uses the power of law to fight senior poverty and advance equity for all of us as we age. We do a lot of work at the national level, which for us means that we work to influence federal policy, but we also support advocates in every state across the country in building better systems to help us all age at the state level as well. And then we do a lot of that work in California. I'm going to talk to you today about the aging policy landscape in DC and how that impacts California. But I love how Wendy framed up the session for today, which is really about centering older adults in that conversation about federal policy. It's impossible to talk about what's happening without talking about some of the people in DC who demand our attention all of the time and constantly want the story to be about them. But we're trying to start at Justice and Aging, and I want us all to start today. And I think our mission coming out of today as advocates is to center older adults and people with disabilities in this conversation about these policies. So there's some big people that we'll talk about later, but they're not the main characters in our story and our work. The main characters in our story and our work are older adults themselves, and understanding how different policies impact real people in our communities, in our families, in our lives, real people that we care about, their access to healthcare, their access to economic security, their access to housing and food and basic supports is at risk. And that's where our focus should be, on supporting those people, explaining how policies will impact them, and then taking those stories into the policy conversation. So let's really work today to keep, and moving forward, to keep people at the center of what we're doing. Now I'm hoping that today is going to be kind of participatory. I'm going to talk for a while, but I want to leave a lot of time for Q&A. There's so much happening right now in the policy landscape. I want to hear what you're thinking about, what your ideas are, what you have questions about, so that I'm really, helping you think through and really drawing from your expertise and experience to do this together. I'm also going to be looking for some help in my presentation. Can I ask for 4 volunteers? Just it's going to be easy. Okay, there's 1, 2, I see in the back 3, and 4. I don't have slides. There's a couple reasons for that. One is I wanted to really talk directly to you, and I didn't want you to have to look at a screen or read a bunch of stuff on a screen. Also, this is the first time I'm doing a public presentation since the inauguration, so I'm still kind of learning my best way to talk about this. So those 4 volunteers, you're going to be my subs for slides of transition from the different things I'm going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about 4 things today. So where was my first in? Your build. Here was your protect. In the back, your state of play. And over here, your action. okay? All right, so can you stand up and say your slide for me? What was it? All right, so I want us to start with what it is we're trying to build. Thank you. The election changes a lot. The election changes who's in power. But the election doesn't change what we're all trying to build. And the election doesn't change the reality that we know older adults in our lives and in our communities are experiencing. We know that too many older adults are lacking access to healthcare, lacking access to long-term care, especially care at home. They're lacking access to economic security and housing. So we are still invested in building towards those things today. And at Justice and Aging, we're focused on building 4 things for older adults: a health and long-term care system, economic security, housing and ending homelessness, and civil and human rights for all of us as we age. Just as we were focused on building those things before the election, we're still focused on building those things today. In our healthcare system, we need a strong, funded, open, accessible Medicaid system. In our Medicare system, we need that system to be funded, to be strong, to be working to lower prices and increase affordability for everyone. We need prescription drug costs to be lower. We need an LTSS system that's actually a system that helps people afford care, provides more care at home, and supports our caregivers that are such an important part of that system. In our economic security programs, we need a strong Social Security system, and we need a supplemental security income system that provides higher benefits and is much easier to navigate for the people that qualify. We need to be working to end elder homelessness in California and across the country. It is a disgrace how many older people we leave homeless and without the support that they need and safe housing. And then we need to be building civil and human rights for all of us as we grow older. We need to all have equal and equitable access to the systems and supports that we need to meet our basic needs. What else do you want to add to this vision of aging, of what we should be building proactively and positively? Yeah.
I'd like to emphasize intergenerational communities. I think it's very important that we don't isolate the older adults in their own communities that share.
Fantastic, fantastic. So intergenerational communities and integration, true community, not isolation. Yeah.
I'd like to see the transportation system that supports our people so that they can get food security and other services.
Great. So a truly accessible and usable transportation system. Yeah.
And normalizing it and not making it like a coming this group, just like making it more community-based.
Yeah, more community-based, more something we're looking forward to, right? What else? I'll take 2 more. Yeah, here.
Yes, I just wanted to say that we need also to be able to acquire intimate equipment for the senior citizens.
So equipment for senior citizens. Yes.
Equipment, I mean, underwear, whatever they need, they should be able to.
Yeah, basic supplies, durable medical equipment, right? And then I saw one here. Yeah, sorry.
Making care more accessible and readily available for all without the cumbersome bureaucracies and without the onus being on the provider on the recipient always to have to do all of the recruitment, training, managing, and all of that.
Great. So making care accessible, easy to navigate, not putting it all on each of us to build our system, but rather a system we can plug into. I'm going to stop there. I encourage us to continue this conversation throughout the day about what is that positive vision for aging. Now, so I want to be sure, I've been in this work for a long time. There's good and bad times from a policy perspective of who's in power, but we're always building. Right? So sometimes that building means you have a chance to add. Sometimes if you're like building a house, sometimes you get to add a room. Other times you need to protect. Sometimes you need to do some work on your foundation. But no matter what you're doing, you're always building. Sometimes it's in playing offense and sometimes in it's playing defense. But we're always want to be building with that positive vision of who we're serving and why and what we're building for them. Now, unfortunately, we are in a situation where we're building by protecting. So where's my second slide? Yeah. All right. So the second idea here is protect. We are in an environment at the federal level where there are threats everywhere. If you thought a program that is important to you, that's a federal program, would be safe in this environment, the bad news is you're wrong. We know that now from this week, that there is no reason to believe that anything that we work on and care about and that is effective at serving our communities is safe. There are threats everywhere. There's threats that have come from specific policy proposals now in Congress or from the new administration that would cut and otherwise undermine Medicaid, Medicare, the long-term care system. The Older Americans Act has taken a hit already in a way. Social Security, SSI, all kinds of civil rights protections have all either already been directly attacked or are on lists of potential attacks as we move forward. I'm going to talk about two areas where Justice and Aging is particularly focused right now on protection, and they're where we already see a very robust set of policy proposals and changes. So I'm going to go a little deeper in those, but in Q&A, I'm happy to come back to anything that's on your mind or anything that you've been reading about. So I want to start with Medicaid. This is our top priority, Justice and Aging right now. You're going to be hearing a lot about Medicaid in the next few months, but here's a couple of things that I want you to keep in mind. All of the proposals that you'll hear about are cuts to the program. And they will be cuts to not just to the program, but to people. They'll be cutting services for people that rely on Medicaid to meet basic health care and long-term care needs. The second basic idea here is those are going to be cuts to older adults and people with disabilities. Now, you're going to hear some things that aren't true. You're going to hear not that these are cuts, but they're going to be called proposals or policies or innovations. They're cuts. Because the core reason they're being done is to save money to pay for other priorities, primarily to pay for tax cuts for wealthy people. So they're cuts. The other kind of myth you'll hear is that these cuts are necessary to protect Medicaid for older adults and people with disabilities. That's not true. Cuts to any part of the Medicaid system, and in California, of course, we call Medicaid Medi-Cal. Any cuts to the Medicaid system are not severable. They're not targeted to just one population, but not another. The way the Medicaid system works now is that if you take some away, it creates stress and pressure across the entire system. It actually leaves older adults and people with disabilities particularly vulnerable because many of the Medicaid programs that we like most for older adults, which are the programs that help keep older adults at home and in the community, home and community-based services, those are technically under the Medicaid program what are called optional services. Nursing facility services are mandatory. Home-based services are optional. So if a state is forced into a position of needing to cut back their Medicaid program because they're getting less money from the federal government, they can't cut the mandatory program, the nursing facilities. They can cut the optional programs, the home care systems. So states that see decreases in federal money from Medicaid, are gonna have to turn to cutting services for older adults and people with disabilities. So don't fall for the myths that these proposals are not cuts, and don't fall for the myth that these cuts are being done to save services for older adults and people with disabilities. There's two types of cuts that are being put forward in DC. Generally, one is around how the program is financed, and the other is around who qualifies for the program. So you're going to start to hear, and we've got more materials and webinars coming, so and I can talk as deep as you want to go on these today, but that there's proposals in how the program is financed that are cuts. So you'll hear their ideas to create per capita caps, where every state gets a certain amount of money for each person in the program. That's a cut. You'll hear conversations about changing the matching rate at which the federal matching participation level, change that for different states. That's a cut. You'll hear about ending or reforming provider taxes that are used to fund the Medicaid or Medi-Cal program. That's a cut. So you'll hear some ideas around financing. They're all different ways to cut the program and cut services. The other category, like I said, is changing who's eligible and what the conditions are for eligibility. The biggest one we're hearing about here is work requirements, adding work requirements to the program for people that aren't older adults or qualified as people with disabilities. That's a cut in who receives services. And even if it isn't targeted to somebody who's 65 and over, it's targeted to lots of people that are 50 to 64. And it's targeted to people that live with and care for and provide supports to people who are 65 and over. So, all of these things end up impacting older adults. In addition to, these eligibility reduction kind of proposals, there's work requirements, and then there was a whole bunch of new regulations that were created in the Biden administration that made it easier for older adults to find their way to Medicaid, to get on the program and then stay on the program by loosening requirements to ask people to constantly reprove their eligibility. This is especially important for older adults who, to get on the program, have to prove that they've got income and assets low enough to qualify. But most older adults, their income isn't changing wildly from one year to the next. If you're 80 years old on Medicaid, it's not common that you would get a new job and your income would go up at age 81. And you need to now prove that you're still eligible. So the Trump administration is working actively and Congress is working actively to remove these rules that made it easier to stay on the program. So that's another thing that we're watching out for. I want to call out quickly an important Medicare one before I move on to my next big priority. On Medicare, Medicare just finally got the authority to negotiate prescription drug prices. And that's leading to lower prescription drug prices for older adults and people with disabilities throughout the Medicare program. The Trump administration has already issued an executive order to stop negotiating for lower drug prices. And we expect Congress to also be working to undo the federal law that was passed a couple of years ago that created the opportunity for Medicare to do that. I saw a lot of quizzical looks, like, why would you do that? I'm not going to be able to explain the why of any of this today. I leave that to pundits and psychologists. Another area that is already where we're seeing the most attacks and most threats already, even in this fourth day of the administration, I guess it's the fifth day, is immigration. And I want to talk to you about 4 reasons that advocates for older adults should care about immigration. Because and I bet a lot of you do already, but a lot of people think we don't, and a lot of people think we shouldn't. And I think that's wrong, and we think that's wrong at Justice and Aging. So 4 reasons. First of all, guess what? There are older adults who are immigrants. Even our friends sometimes in the immigration rights movement forget that. So there are older adults who are undocumented, and if as the administration is targeting to deport undocumented folks, that's going to impact a lot of older adults in our communities. The next is that there are older adults who are immigrants who are documented, who do have every legal right to be here. And many people that are immigrants with documentation are going to get caught up in these raids and swept up in these raids. We're already actually hearing about people who are being arrested in these raids who are US citizens, not to mention immigrants who may not be US citizens, but are documented. The third is that older adults live in families, and they may have immigrants, documented and undocumented, in their families. And so they will be impacted as their families are disrupted by these new restrictions and raids. And then the 4th reason is older adults have caregivers who are immigrants. It could be a family member, or it could be a paid caregiver who is essential to caring for them at home or in a nursing facility. What would happen if there was a raid at a nursing facility that arrested the workers at that facility? what would happen that day and what would happen the next. I can guarantee you the administration is not planning, as part of the raid, to bring in temporary workers to come in and finish that shift and to be there for the next week or two while new workers are identified. Attacks on immigrants will greatly increase what we already know is a caregiver crisis throughout our system. So that's another big area that we're watching for threats and attacks. Okay, gonna move on to our third slide. I think third was in the back there. What was our third slide?
State of play.
State of play. All right, thank you. Okay, so what's the current state of play? I've talked generally about what we think the threats are. You know, just to remind everybody, obviously Republicans are in control of the presidency. They also have control of the Senate and the House. Though it's important to realize that their margins are very slim in each chamber, much slimmer than they've ever been before, particularly in the House. In the House, right now, Republicans, there's 2 vacancies in the House. And so Republicans have 218 members and Democrats have 215 members. So on any particular vote in the House, only one Republican can vote without the rest of the caucus for a proposal to still move forward if there's no Democrats voting for it. So they can lose one vote in their entire caucus for right now. That'll shift a little bit once those 2 vacancies are filled, but it's still a very, very slim margin. So Republicans have 2 big legislative priorities for this year. You're seeing in the news, they have lots of legislative priorities, but the 2 big ones, the 2 ones that have big price tag are immigration and tax cuts. So the current thinking and reporting from DC, from what we hear on the ground from our team there and our partners, is that it's most likely that Republicans will try to advance 2 reconciliation bills this year. Reconciliation allows things to move forward without being filibustered in the Senate. So in the Senate, they can move forward with just 50 votes instead of having to get 60 to overcome a filibuster. So for the last 15 years, reconciliation has been the main way that either party is able to move forward big priorities. Whether it's an immigration bill or a tax cut bill, under reconciliation, there are some restrictions in what you can do, and you're restricted to only doing things that are about spending. You can't move things that are strictly about policy. There has to be a spending impact for the federal budget. So they're finding ways to create, that's clear on tax cuts, and they're finding ways to make an immigration bill similarly about that. In both an immigration bill and a tax cut bill, they have things they want to spend on, so they need savings to do that. And so in both those cases, they're looking at cuts to the Medicaid program and cuts to other programs to pay for those new investments. So if there's an immigration bill, we expect it to include cuts to Medicaid as part of the way that they'll pay for new enforcement actions and new security at the border. In a tax cut bill, they'll be looking to extend tax cuts for the wealthy, and they'll be looking to cut Medicaid and other programs to pay for those tax cuts. It's going to take about the next month for them to decide their strategy on whether they're going to stick with this idea of 2 reconciliation bills or if they're going to try to do everything in one. And the first step in the reconciliation process is to decide just how much money they want to spend and therefore how much money they have to cut. They set a target first. So they'll say we need a total of $500 billion of cuts to pay for the spending we want to do in this bill. And then, so they set the mark, and then they start finding policies that will help them meet that mark. So they're saying that they hope to meet those marks by the end of February, like set those marks by the end of February. As part of their process, Republicans have shared what they call a menu. It's kind of a perverse thing. They call a menu of potential programs that they could cut to pay for the things that they want to do. It's like, going to a diner and finding a menu of horrible things that you could do to people. Just about everything we care about is on that menu. There's the proposals to cut Medicaid, There's proposals to cut Medicare. There's proposals to cut SSI. There's proposals to cut SNAP or food stamps. There's everything that you can imagine on there. So that's kind of the state of play right now in Congress. At the administrative level, has been a flood of executive orders already. Some of those executive orders impact older adults very directly. I mentioned there was an executive order to stop negotiating prescription drug prices in the Medicare program. There's executive orders to undo important protections and expansions of Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. And then there's lots of EOs, executive orders attacking immigrants, as well as attacking diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility programs in the federal government and even in nonprofits, schools, and private industry. We also expect the administration, as they really get set up, to attack programs in the way that they administer programs. So they'll be running the Medicare program, the Medicaid program, the Social Security Administration. And there we think they're going to be reversing many important rules that have protected people, rules that prohibit age discrimination in healthcare settings. Those are all on their list for things that they want to roll back and undo. We're already seeing that they've started to defund or stop work on programs, especially in the healthcare space. Lots of orders to either stop what you're doing or just canceling projects all the way. That's already started this week. We'll also see at the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice has been very important for protecting and advancing civil rights, including for older adults, by prosecuting Olmstead cases and other disability rights cases that have helped older adults access more services at home and in the community. And it's already been clear that this Department of Justice will no longer be affirmatively advancing cases like that. And in some cases, they'll be working to undermine the precedent of previous cases that we and others have helped build. And then a final threat that we're watching in the current state of play is the DOGE Commission. This is the Department of Government Efficiency that Elon Musk is heading up. It's been created as an office within the White House. And the whole goal of that commission is to cut federal spending. They've set targets as much as $2 trillion in cuts to spending. There's no way that they could achieve cuts at that level without significantly cutting not just Medicaid, but also Medicare and even Social Security. And despite campaign promises, we've seen Republicans in Congress already indicate that absolutely they are open to cuts to Social Security and Medicare. So that's the current state of play. Where's my last and final slide?
Action.
All right, action. So we have a lot of work to do, and we can absolutely make a difference if we do that work. I know I've hit you with a lot of scary stuff, but I gave similar talks in 2017 too, and a lot of them didn't happen, not because they weren't organized or not because they didn't really want to do it. It didn't happen because people like you stood up and said no, and it worked. So the last thing we can afford to think right now is that it won't matter what we do. And the last thing we can afford to feel right now is that we're too tired. And the last thing that we can afford to do right now is to give up. We've got to continue to stand up like we've done so many times before. We talk about 2017, but I've been in this work for 22 years now. And there was times before that. And I know there's people here whose history of activism and advocacy and work for community goes back way longer than 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. The entire story is a story of pushing back and fighting for those gains and then protecting them and then fighting for more gains and protecting them. This moment only feels so difficult because of all that we've achieved till now, right? We can look at each other, we can look at our colleagues, we can look at the people in our community, and each person we look at, we can look at something that we won together, something we achieved together. And those things are at risk right now, which feels awful. but it also means we've done it before and we can do it again. We already can see it's working. There was reporting last night that there was a meeting of a group of Republicans who are in districts where their win was tight, and they were meeting with Republican leadership to say, we can't cut Medicaid. And it was interesting, the Republicans that want to cut things were frustrated because they went through their menu that I mentioned, and these more moderate Republicans who are in districts where their seat is not as safe were saying, we can't do that. They went through the whole menu. Nope, 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 nope. Because they were seeing that there's people in my community that will be impacted negatively if we do this, and that'll impact my political chances. So it's working. And there was 2 Californians in that meeting, 2 California Republican congressmen who were in that meeting cautioning against cuts. So that's happening because of communities in California, communities in other states are out there engaging with these electeds, and it's making a difference. So now is not the time to feel like things don't matter or that we can't make a difference. So here's some pieces of advice I have for you. 1, work in coalition. Continue to work with Wendy, work as a group here together, work with non-aging and disability coalitions, work with other aging and disability coalitions. We've got to build a big team, right? It's going to take a lot of us working together to do this. 2, stay educated. Half of what I said today will be different tomorrow because the policy environment changes quickly. So stay educated. You can sign up for Justice and Aging's webinars and alerts where we're going to be keeping you posted on the latest news. Next, contact your elected officials, write letters, send emails, make phone calls, do visits. These things do work. It doesn't matter if they're already somebody who's on our side. It gives them power and energy and inspiration to hear from you. And then, of course, if there's somebody that you're worried would support something that's bad for our community, then they need to hear from you as well. Like I said, it's working already. I've been talking about federal threats, but any bad stuff that happens at the federal level, California is going to have to react to. So you also have to be engaging with your local electeds in the city, the county, at the state level to make sure that when they are forced into decisions, they're doing the best job they can, and they're mindful of our community as they make those decisions. And in all of this engagement, again, it's not to go in there and talk about how bad these people are in DC or how you don't like something somebody said on cable news. Our jobs is to come out in there and explain how these policies would impact older adults and people with disabilities in our community. What would it mean for the people that you love, the people that you serve, the people that you work with? How would this change their life? What would the result be? So really grounding what Medicaid cuts, Medi-Cal cuts would mean for older adults in your community, and then elevating the stories of real people to take some of this stuff out of these political conversations and ground them in the lives of real people. So the reality is that we are in a defensive moment. But any sports fans in here? Defense isn't a separate game from offense. Defense and offense are all part of one game. You're on a different side of the court or a different side of the field. And we've all heard all of the sayings about sports, right? The best offense is a good defense. The defense leads to offense. And we've seen that before. In 2017, the last time that Medicaid was under the level of threat it is now, we all stood together and we defended Medicaid from federal cuts in 2017. And in 2018, in 2019, in 2020, California expanded Medicaid in historic ways because we had built these strong coalitions to protect the program. And then we were able to turn that defense into the best Medicaid offense we've ever seen and to build the country's most progressive, expansive Medicaid program. So it was that defense turning into offense. So this is an opportunity for us to work in coalition, to build together, to create strength that we'll be able to use when the winds shift and when the environment gives us a chance not just to protect, but also to be doing that building that we're looking forward to. So I couldn't be more excited to be with all of you, to be in this room together. And I'm happy to now hear from you about what you're working on and what you have questions about and what we can do together.
Okay, we have time for Q&A. You know what? So how many people have questions? Raise your hand. So, no, we've got, we could, Kevin, we could take questions from people or on cards. You have a
I don't have a preference. Whatever.
Okay. So those of you who have questions, yes. What I like is the interaction that we've been able to have happen here. But maybe this was a bad idea because we have a forest to get through.
So using your experience, and you have a great group of, I think, very enthusiastic supporters of these issues. What would your advice be to our first kind of top priority to pull together across interests, not just older adults, but everybody in the community? If we were to pick reaching out and building coalitions, what would you pick as the top way we do that and organize and focus our energy?
Yeah, I think Medicaid and immigration. I think those are the two where we have the most clear threats already and where we can find lots of common cause. On the Medicaid side in California, Health Access California is putting together a coalition that you can start to plug into as well. Fight for Our Health. If you Google that, Fight for Our Health California, you'll find a website that's been created. And that's where we're participating and encouraging others to participate. Cross-sector, cross-community effort there to push back on cuts to Medicaid, changes to the Affordable Care Act, and how those would impact California. And then on the immigration side, we're a part of some federal coalitions. I'm not as familiar with the state-based coalitions that are working on immigration, but I think that those are two great places to start. That's not to be, there's many other issues and needs of concern, but those are two that, again, are going to be the big legislative priorities. So a place where activation can really make a difference.
Okay, and I do have some written questions too. So the next one is, how do federal cuts impact California state policy? For example, California State Master Plan on Aging and Older American Act funding.
Medicaid is a giant part of the state's budget, and half of that program is funded by federal funds. So any change to how much the state is getting from the feds for the Medi-Cal program will put a huge dent in the state's budget that the state will then need to scramble to figure out how to fill. And there's no way for California to plan around the amount of money that would be pulled out by a change at the federal level. But that change would, again, it would impact the Medicaid services, Medi-Cal services, but it would also start to impact other services that the state offers because of what a large part of the budget it is. That's the clearest threat that we've been focused on. But the other potential impact is this DOJ commission and a continued hawkishness for budget cuts from Republicans. The Older Americans Act would definitely be caught up in any kind of broad cut to federal spending because it's a program that's not a mandatory spending program. It's a discretionary spending program. So when there have been previous cuts to federal spending broadly, like sequestration, if you all remember when there was sequestration battles, the Older Americans Act will be impacted by that. And we would see decreases in Older Americans Act funding. We should not fool ourselves that the Older Americans Act is like safe and nonpartisan. We actually had a deal in December to reauthorize the Older Americans Act as part of the continuing resolution. That's the continuing resolution deal that got blown up by some tweets from President-elect at the time, Trump, and from Elon Musk. They blew up that deal, and the reauthorization of the Older Americans Act was stripped out of the deal that was ultimately advanced. There's also been a lot of attention from Republicans in the last 2 years on the Older Americans Act. Some have wanted to reauthorize the program, and that's helpful. There's not been a lot of energy from Republicans in increasing the allocations to the Older Americans Act to reflect the growing need. And there's been a lot of attacks on the Older Americans Act for doing too much to help LGBTQ older adults. And they've wanted to strip out any special funding or any special conditions or provisions or any programs that impact LGBTQ older adults. So we shouldn't think that aging is fine, that aging is good. I was telling somebody at my table yesterday, the Social Security Administration stopped work on a contract to explore retirement security for women, because that's an equity program, and that's not worth the time of the federal government anymore. Again, I don't want to scare, but I do want to inspire that we shouldn't think that we can float through safely while these other communities are attacked. We've got to be in coalition with others, and we've got to understand that these broad efforts to cut services are going to impact older adults too.
Thank you, Kevin. A real quick question. Who are the 2 Republicans from swing districts in California who met with leadership to push back about Medicaid?
So the 2 Republicans that were in the meeting and from reports in the meeting carrying a good message for us were David Villado from the Central Valley and Young Kim from Orange County. There are other Republicans in Congress from California, so not that are in Alameda County, but how can we be in common cause with colleagues and coalitions that are able to speak directly to electeds from those other districts? That's our task.
Okay. Next question. What impact do you foresee the Trump administration having on new federal APS guidelines, Adult Protective Services? I think that's what APS means to the person who wrote this. Okay.
Yeah, so we don't know yet. There were new regulations that were created for APS in the Biden administration. There does seem to be an attitude from the Trump administration that anything that the Biden administration did is bad and should just be reversed whole hog. I don't know that there's actually a policy disagreement between Republicans and Democrats about the APS regulations. So we don't know on that yet.
Okay, what about Olmstead? Why isn't a Supreme Court decision the law of the land?
So Olmstead is the law of the land. Olmstead is a Supreme Court decision that said that people that have long-term care needs have a right to have those needs met in the least restrictive setting possible. So that's generally been used to argue for services to be provided at home and community-based settings instead of institutions, wherever possible or however possible. There's been a lot of good litigation since then that has helped define what that means. We've used it in California for example, when IHSS was threatened with cuts in the Great Recession, we used Olmstead to argue that IHSS could not be cut because it would leave people in a more restrictive setting because they would lose access to home care and they'd end up in nursing facilities. We used it to save adult day health care at the time. And so it's been a very helpful thing, but it is under challenge right now for lots of different reasons. But there's a case in Texas challenging Section 504 of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is a related section of the ADA, which helps provide support for the Olmstead claims. And it's being challenged by Republican attorney generals claiming, and they're now claiming challenging the integration mandate, saying it goes too far. It asks states to do too much. And so that's definitely a risk. And our courts have changed a lot. So, even precedent from decades ago is under threat because courts change and interpretations change. And of course, we saw that most famously in the Dobbs decision overruling Roe. So the law of the land is the law of the land until the law changes. So we need to be we can still use it. Olmstead is still good law, but we need to be very aware that these things aren't safe forever. We need to be standing up and speaking about how important they are to our communities.
Thank you. We have time for just one more question, and to let you know, those of you who didn't get your questions answered, I'll share them with Kevin and see if we can get them out to you. Last question. California has expanded Medi-Cal services, full scope services for undocumented, and removed asset limits for Medi-Cal. Are these at risk? And how would that play out logistically?
Yeah, they are at risk. The clearest threat to them is that, again, if there's a decrease in federal Medicaid funding under any of these cut proposals that are being advanced, California would have to look at how they would scale back their Medi-Cal program. And both of the expansions that you mentioned, covering all undocumented people that otherwise qualify for Medi-Cal, and getting rid of our asset test, those are things that the state isn't required to do by federal law. So those are the kinds of things that they could stop doing and not violate federal law. And they would, by stop doing them, they would decrease our state Medi-Cal spending in response to having less federal Medi-Cal spending or Medi-Cal money coming in. So those are two things that could definitely go away. Interestingly, in the menu of cuts that Republicans have put together, one of the cuts is to prohibit states from using their own money to pay for Medicaid for undocumented people, which is what we do in California and New York. Only California and only New York. This would not save a single federal dollar because California only uses state money to do it, but it's still on their menu of options for federal savings, even though it saves the federal government $0. So this is the level of attack that immigrant communities are facing.
So that's the time that we have. Kevin Prindiville with Justice and Aging, thank you so much.
Thank you. Keep up the good work.